these opportunities, these challenges in life, we can reframe them just like anything else. We can get stuck in the mud. And I can tell you, so I had actually been in Europe when the storm hit. And I was in Traverse City, Michigan, which is about an hour and a half south of where I live in Petoskey. And I had flown in. Things had gone from bad to worse. A lot of people had lost power this past Saturday, but then the winds and more snow and more ice hit, and then a lot more was falling, trees and power lines wise Saturday night and Sunday morning. So it went from bad to worse. People who could get out of their neighborhoods were all of a sudden unable to get out. They freshly didn't have power, and it was fascinating because one thing you kind of feel some survivor guilt, right? Like when you're not suffering and your community is suffering, I'm thinking, okay, I'm in Traverse City. I have power, I have heat, but they don't, and you feel bad. But then I realized like you can't put the fire out from inside the house, right? You have to be outside the house to help put the fire out. And so, connecting with my community, what do you need? What do you need? And I went up with a full car, just stock full of, we call them loppers, the things to cut branches, chainsaws, which I'd never operated a day in my life before, multiple chainsaws, uh, three big cans of gasoline and oil and lubrication for the chainsaws, like all the things that I just never thought of having. I brought up groceries for people who had been without groceries. I brought up a generator and the requisite items you need for that. I mean, my car was just full of survival equipment that I had never thought about needing before. And I came into the neighborhood and met with my neighbors, many of which it was impassable. They couldn't get out. And we all came together and we took on passage after passage after passage of the main road to our neighborhood and then to the driveways so people could literally get out of their homes. I hooked up a generator. The scariest part for me actually was that my fish almost died because the dogs were out of the house, but my fish were stuck in the house with no power and no aeration. I walk in and they were just gulping the air. And I said, oh no. So I got the generator hooked up literally just for the fish. This new generator basically just kept the fish alive. And then by the time I came in to plug them in so that they would have aeration and the heater would go back on, they were floating upside down. And I'm tapping on the tank like, no, 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 live. And every time I would tap, they'd kind of, it was like a mini version of fish CPR, and they'd come back to life. And then the aeration started, and within 20 minutes, they were up and swimming like nothing happened. And I was so grateful. But the thing was that, no matter where we are in a situation, in a community, relationship, family, there's always something we can do. And there was a moment when I was in the hotel in Traverse City and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to go back to my house. I know the road's impassable. I know I have no heat. I don't know how to do any of the things that I need to do to fix this, but I have to try. And there were moments where I literally felt my mind almost like getting stuck in mud, like tires, right? And then the spinning started. And then you just have to quiet your mind and stop and say, no, we need to go onward. What can I do? I can be the fireman outside the house. I can bring supplies. And someone else can meet us there who can show us how to use the supplies, and on and on and on until what looked like something that should take weeks to clean up, within hours, we had everything free and passable so emergency vehicles could get in, so people could get into their homes and start the cleanup process that is going to be ongoing now for weeks and months here in northern Michigan. But it really, to your point, made me so grateful for the community and relationships that I have now in my life, because there was a different time in my life earlier, not really that long ago, where because of my own limiting beliefs and my own scarcity mindset about what I had to offer and what was accessible to me, I had not necessarily surrounded myself with people who would have helped, who would have reached out. And there were certainly times in my life where I was giving a lot and it was just leaching out of me, right? Now, I so passionately lean into giving, but I also am surrounded by people who that is a relationship that goes back and forth. There's this unspoken reciprocity that really is a part of community that makes things work. If we're just out for ourselves and just doing everything in this moment to help ourselves, that may get us through today, but that's not going to get us through tomorrow. And it's not going to get us there long term. It's like in Mufasa. There's that song. Do you know Mufasa, the new Disney movie? Yeah. So the new song where they say, you want to get there fast, go alone, but you want to, what's the line? Do you know the line? You want to get there fast, go
You're
alone.
putting me on
But
the spot and I want to
I
use
know I'm
Google
trying to remember
so
exactly
bad.
how they said it. You want to get there fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. If you want to go far, go together. And that has really been embodied in the community response and the response in the people dearest in my life to this really tragic event and difficult event. And it really translates to the work that you and I both do in coaching people, learning these tools, because these tools are not for a one-time use. They aren't just to get through this problem. They are going to serve you over and over and over again in life. You never know when, but they will absolutely serve you.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that because sometimes, and maybe you've gone through this, but I know I have gone through this years ago, whereas it does sometimes take an event to open your eyes and be like, man, this person over here, how did I ignore all of the behaviors that I didn't like that they were doing to me? I remember I saw there was like this interview and someone said that when it comes to friends, sometimes well, when people are close to you, sometimes you tolerate from them what you wouldn't tolerate from strangers. So is that a
Mm.
reflection on you or a reflection on the person who's doing it? And I sat back and I was like, you're right. Like there's like that sweet spot when it comes to how long you've known a person where you'll tolerate them mistreating you. Like the first couple of weeks, it's like, okay, you know what? I don't like you. You're very quick. But after 6 months, after 9 months, or in some cases, when some people sleep together, right? All of a sudden the
Mm.
blinders are on and they're like, I can't see any bad. And then when people are
Yeah.
pointing it out, they're like, oh, but this person does this. They treat you like this. They say these things. And they're like, okay, I don't want to hear it. So Schaefer, why do you
Mm.
think some people get stuck in not seeing it, even though sometimes deep down they know it, but they choose to ignore it?
I think so many of us, I think in general, human beings are egotistical in a sense, right? We see ourselves everywhere. That's why perception is perception, it's not reality, right? Your perception is what you see, and it's based on not only how your own brain is wired, which is going to be different from how someone else's brain is wired. So, like, literally, some people see colors differently, right? And they're not wrong. Their brain processes it differently. And that's just how their brain was wired. But now you add in traumas, family systems, what people have experienced, and you add in other issues like other medical issues or psychological issues. Now, the way one person's seeing something is totally different. So if we're bringing along with us this emotional and interpersonal relational baggage that tells us what we can expect of people, we collect people in our lives that remind us of the people that we never healed from, often, most often in our youth, right? Parent figures or other people that were really close to us in our lives that we depended on. And because we depended on them for our literal safety and survival, we couldn't necessarily control that situation and we couldn't change it. So the only person we could change was us. So we learned how to please that person, how to palliate the situation, how to keep them happy and calm, or as much as we could. And then we went out into the world and we saw people who reminded us of them. Now, if we sat down to coffee with our best friend, we might say, "Oh my goodness, I would never want to marry someone like my father or like my mother, whatever it is for you, right? Or like my stepmother. I would never do that." But as we all know, we recognize this feeling of home, this familiarity with people who remind us of the very people that we worked so hard to try to please, often unsuccessfully growing up. And so we collect versions of that person, and then we spend so much time and energy trying to prove to them and really trying to prove to that caregiver that we're worth something, that we're better than they thought that we were. But it's an unwinnable battle. And I like to say it's like being on a hamster wheel. You're running, you're burning all of your focus and energy, you're staring up front. You can't see all the opportunities and the good relationships and the good careers and the opportunities in your life because you're just so focused on running this unwinnable race because it feels familiar. And your momentum in life has been going the same direction every time. This is the relationship you're repeating over and over again. And the work of coaching that is so beautiful and transformative is to try to pose curious questions and try to shift our focus from being so laser focused on running in the same direction. We may be at the point in our life where we say, ouch, this hurts. I'm wasting energy. This doesn't feel good. I can't keep doing this. But we often need help, or like you said, an external, really challenging event to be the impetus to say, okay, not only does this hurt, but I need to change. And that requires a change in momentum. And we know the body in motion stays in motion, but we need a change in momentum to just literally stop running in that direction and take the steps off the hamster wheel. But it's much easier said than done. But having that perspective and having those life events happen that make us stop, they literally physically stop us in our tracks, can be a step forward in a new direction that takes us where we actually want to go in life.
Do you then think that sometimes we stay, as you mentioned, because we understand it, we know it, but the new path, it's unknown. And for a lot of people, the unknown is scary. Could that be why we hesitate to make the changes in our lives?
Yeah, and I think, the body in motion stays in motion. It's funny. I think like we could go back to physics, which I don't know about you, not my favorite subject in school, but if we go back, if we go back to those topics, they translate into our psychological existence as well, not just the physical existence. And the same thing as, matter cannot be created nor destroyed, right? It's always there. Those pieces of us are always there. Right? We can heal from them, but we also have to understand that they're always there. And we have to really intentionally learn how to navigate those emotions and those limiting beliefs so that then we can make really intentional choices so that we can leave. Because until we actually look in the mirror and we see reality for what it is, rather than being stuck in our perception, like you said, like, why have I been with this friend? Why have I invested in this friendship? And now when the chips are down, they're taking as many as they can get and they're running away from the threat instead of putting their chips in with all of us. And we're figuring out how to get through this so that everyone pulls through, right? When we have the opportunity to see that, that's when we can change. But we won't even perceive it unless we've done the work on ourselves to try to decloud our vision because we've been seeing with the same prescription our entire lives. And that's where that self-development work is so key and often happens in midlife because that's the time when hormonally we're changing. Our frontal lobes are finally fully developed, and we're kind of starting to see life from the perspective of someone with a fully developed brain. From a neurologist standpoint, when you think about, we were talking off air, that it would be nice if, when you're 25, you could make good choices, but you know, your frontal lobe's barely fully online at that point in time. So there are some realities. We're navigating life with the tools we have, and we get to a point where, okay, I've got new tools. Now I can do better.
At 25, I thought going to McDonald's for a date was like the epitome of dating. And I'll share a funny story. In Canada, we used to have something called Toonie Tuesday because our $1 is called a loonie and our $2 is called a toonie. So back in the day, what I used to do is I used to schedule all my dates on Tuesdays. So it was $2. This is before I had a car. So it was $2 for the bus, $2 for dinner because you'd go to let's say chicken and fries or whatever. And then it was $2 for a movie. So I used to spend a whole whopping $12 on my date. But to your point, right? I didn't know any better because at the time I thought that was it. As I grew up and I grew into the person that I am now, I did so in a lot of ways because I wanted to, but because I had failure after failure after failure, right? And a lot of times I like to compare to, even though it's not necessarily the same, to like people who have an addiction, where you have
Mm.
to hit rock bottom before you can climb your way up. And the rock bottom for me, for Shaver, for everyone else, it's different. Some people, in regards to women I work with, they literally have to be abused for them to leave, right? Either physically, financially, emotionally. And a lot of men go through that as well. But one thing I did learn was when they escape it, unfortunately, to your point, right? It's later on in life. And some of the people I work with, they would tell me that, Terrain, I'm too old for love.
Mm.
Love is something that you get in your 20s, in your 30s. And then I asked them, I was like, well, look at it like this. When you were married to this person who you eventually called quits because they were abusing you, when you're in it, you thought it was love. When you're out of it, you realize maybe it wasn't the type of love that I thought it was, right? So, Shiva, for you, when you're working with the people that you work with, in hindsight, do they reevaluate their relationships and say, okay, this is what it was. It's a lot different than I thought it was when I was actually in it.
Yeah. I will give an example. So when coaching someone, it's all about perspective, right? That it always goes back to perspective. And that's one of the beautiful things about art and movies and podcasts and music is we gain a new perspective. And sometimes and often, again, because the way brain works, we are very focused on our own lives and our own stories, and we're always trying to figure them out. So we can watch a movie or listen to a song or listen to a podcast and say, oh my goodness, I have a fresh perspective on this experience that I'm having. And so I remember coaching someone who was saying that, and this was such a pivotal moment in the conversation because I was aware of abuse in a relationship that they were experiencing, but they weren't aware. And it was not my place as a coach to say, you're being abused. It was my role to help them gain perspective on their situation in their own time and take ownership and feel empowered about how they wanted to respond to that. And it was something as simple. There were many, many clues and what we say often red flags, right? And we hear about that a lot right now. There were many red flags and clues to the outsider, but it's like that frog in boiling water, right? Like, why do we not respond for a long time? Well, because the water's just, it's just a little hotter and then it's a little hotter. But then often at the end stage of abusive relationships, we start to question because it's starting to hurt. It's starting to get worse enough that, ooh, it's starting to scald the skin. And then we say, ooh, what about that? And then all of a sudden, what often happens is something that was tenable becomes untenable because then the temperature really goes up. Because when you say, I actually don't like that you're doing that to me, an abusive person is going to try to increase the coercive control and make sure that you know where you belong, which is in that relationship under their control. Whereas a person that you have a good relationship with and a reciprocal relationship will say, oh my goodness, okay, well, they may have some issues with, deniability or accountability, as we often do. I didn't mean to do that to you, right? But a person in a healthy relationship may say that at first, and you say, well, I understand that, but this is how I experience it. And they'll say, oh, well, I don't want to hurt you. So even though I didn't mean to hurt you, you experienced it that way. Let's figure out a way to get through this so that I stop hurting you. Because the last thing I want to do is hurt you, right? That's a healthy relationship. But when you're in a relationship that coercive control and abuse is present, that's not what happens, right? So they turn up the temperature. Now the water is boiling. And what do you do? So for this particular person, one of the ways that I was able to help them have a different perspective. I like to do a bird's eye view of examples, right? So they were explaining to me how they would park and how their partner allowed them to park their car closest to the house. That was kind of that was a sign of them respecting them. You know, it takes me less time to bring in groceries and things. That was their perspective, and that's what they had been basically told what was happening. But as they were explaining their days, what was happening from an outsider's viewpoint was everyone else parked their cars at the edge of the driveway and could leave, could come and go freely. And this person was trapped. They could never leave because there was always someone in their way. But it had been framed for them, oh, look, you're so lucky you get to park closest to the house. But they were literally trapped. They couldn't leave. And so we did a bird's eye view and broke down what that meant, from their perspective. And there was this aha moment of, oh my good, I'm actually trapped. I can't leave my home. They leave regularly and I leave once or twice a week because I literally can't leave. And then they started thinking about all of the other ways. Once you have that aha moment, then they're thinking about other ways in their life that they can't get out. Conversations, disagreements, financial situations, choices they make for parenting their children, choices they make for their education and their vocation. All of those things were similarly framed that, oh, we're making this decision for you. But once they took a different look at it, they realized, no, the decision was made for me and I was made to feel I didn't have another choice, but it was dressed up in pretty wrapping to make it seem like I had agency. And at that point, then the question is, what do you want to do now that you recognize that? Because you do have agency, right? That's a facade that they've created for you, but it's not. It's not true. Now, there are hurdles to jump through to get between where you are and agency that is actionable on a daily basis. And that's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. What do you want to do now? Or what do you want to do making a step forward? Or do you, right? Because people need to make these choices in their own time. They need to feel confident and ready to change their circumstances. But even just getting that acknowledgement and that perspective shift, until you have that, you cannot change. And so that's why it's so important to me through having an online community. We don't tell our stories where we do things like share videos, discussions, the podcast, interviews. We share songs and movies, all that help add different perspectives so that when victims, often women, when we look statistically, of course, of control and abuse, hear that perspective, it might just be that little switch in perspective. It may help them see more clearly what's occurring in their own lives, which then is the domino tipping over to lead to that effect where they can really lean into their own lives, into freedom and into regaining agency over their lives. And so I'm so passionate about that through my community as well as through books that I'm writing and talks with Dr. Shafer, just to try to really help people gain that perspective of agency and of the value of their own life and their own health, because we can't live a happy, healthy life if we are feeling trapped and that we don't have our freedom.
Do you think then the age of the person has an impact on when they realize or achieve that type of perspective and possible agency?
I do. I think what used to be deemed as a midlife crisis because it was like snappy and cool and fun, and we thought of the guy in the sports car, right? That's what we envisioned when we thought about a midlife crisis. I think many of us do go through that because again, our frontal lobes, once we're in our late 20s, early 30s, they're coming online, right? Many of us have young children and we are in survival mode, right? And we're just like one foot in front of the other. get the kids dressed, diapered, and then get the kids to school. And then by the time they're a little older, then we're starting to actually come up for air and we're starting to notice what's going on. And the sad thing about that, about living in that survival mode, again, a lot of it stems from what we experienced in early life, right? We're replicating systems that we were a part of or that we witnessed. And so it didn't feel that unusual. But again, about the perspective shifting and the beauty of things like podcasts and movies and music is to share that life doesn't have to be this way. We can have partnerships that are healthy and are truly helping one another rear children if that's something that you are doing or that you're interested in doing, help you have a successful career, help you make sure that you're living a healthy lifestyle. Our relationships can be something that builds us up, not breaks us down or imprisons us. And for so many people, it takes until that middle of life to look around and realize that the choices we've made, leaning into what we think other people want or expect of us and pleasing other people, hasn't really propelled us forward on our life's journey's path, but it has imprisoned us in cages that we unintentionally added bricks to or reinforced over the years. And now, in that midlife time, we can say, okay, how do I want to use my energy now? Because this isn't working anymore, and I need to do something different and start living my life because the clock is ticking, and time is the most precious resource we have.
And I explained that very thing to that's what you just described. I explained that to someone and I said that what sometimes happens is that women in general, they're givers, right? Like, what
Mm.
it's like givers they want to receive because that's in general how a lot of women are built, right? And then you have the men who will want to receive as well, but they're givers in a different way. And I said that sometimes what happens between men and women is that even though we will struggle in relationships differently, a lot of that struggle is very similar. We all want to be loved. We all want to be appreciated. We all want to know that we matter. But sometimes what happens is that we get caught up in thinking what we're doing is pleasing the other person. Because if
Mm.
that was done to us or if we received it, we'd be the happiest person. I told someone the other day that when it comes to the type of receiving the type of apology, I was like, out of all the apologies you've ever received in your life, how did it make you feel? Like, well, some made me feel okay, some made me feel good, some I wish it was something else. I was like, did all the apologies you've ever received, did the person acknowledge what they did, show remorse for how you felt, and then made amends by offering something? I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to make sure you, whatever the case is. And they're like, Trey, no. Like, usually just, I'm sorry. I was like,
Mm.
okay, $1 million question now. What are they sorry for? Right? And a lot of people don't ask that, they just accept it. And the reason why I bring that up is to your point, it could stem back from your childhood or from earlier life because maybe when something went wrong, your first situation of it was someone of authority.
Mm.
And we all know when they're children, right? Someone of authority, that's gonna be okay, you know what? I'm sorry. And they'll move on quickly. Or what happened to me as a child is that if they want to say they're sorry and shut you up, here's a gift, here's a toy. I'm sorry, shut up.
Mm.
Right? So you begin to now look at certain behaviors of certain people, as you mentioned, right? As a trigger, as something that, okay, it's not worth as much. I feel powerless because I accepted
Mm.
it when I had no other choice to accept it. But as an adult, I have choice, but I still feel I don't have choice, right?
Yes.
Because you don't have the agency. So, how important is it for the person to truly understand whether you're 20, 30, or even 60 to understand that you have power, you have control, you have what you think you didn't have in your younger years now, but don't mistake in it thinking that you're still a child in an adult body.
It's so incredibly important. And I think convincing people that they don't have power or agency is the root of most of the really horrible events that have happened in human history, right? When we convince people that they don't have power or agency and we concentrate the power in a place with a group of people who want a certain thing. And then we say, okay, yeah, they have the power. They're right. Oh, I'm powerless next to them. And we reinforce their power and we reinforce our idea that we don't have power, right? So we can often think about that on a global scale right now when we think about the geopolitical issues that are happening around the globe, right? That are very, they feel just on the tip of our minds right now because it's all over the news. It's all every conversation we have, right? We're thinking about power, political power. And imagine how that makes you feel as an adult. Now imagine how a child feels. I think we forget what it was like to be a child often, to be that child and feel completely powerless and know that your survival was based on pleasing this person, your caregiver. I know now, for example, here in the States, there are people, that we've got the two-party system and then independents, and there are people who are a part of the party that are not, they're not in charge right now. And they'll want to post something on social media and their husband saying, "No, don't do that. Like, we don't want negative, what if I lost my job? What if this happened? What if there was this consequence of me voicing because you voiced your opinion on that?" Right? And I think a lot of people feel that way right now. I think a lot of people are afraid of voicing their opinions on things. And it feels really surprising and awful to people, for example, in the United States who are experiencing this. Many of them are experiencing it for the first time. Those of us who have been in abusive relationships or who have traveled to other countries, right? We've experienced it on different scales and in different circumstances that no, no, no. This misuse of power this is a tale as old as time, and it gets used in all these different frameworks, but it's the same patterns. And for many people who become victims of abuse later in life, when you look back at their imprint of what relationships look like, it's because they did experience this misuse of power because their parents were the all powerful people in the home, because they really relied on them for their survival. And so it's interesting to see how that gets replicated and really frightening. And it reinforces why it works. Because if it didn't work, these systems and governments and things that don't necessarily have the people that they govern's interests in mind, they wouldn't be using shame, blame, ostracizing one group of people, kind of turning the people against another group of people, saying, oh, they're the reason for the problems. Why do we do that? Because it works and it's replicated in these abusive, toxic family systems. So it's the same framework, just used on different scales. And so I think the discomfort people feel right now in the world with the amount of political turmoil for us as adults is a good reminder of how important learning to have healthy relationships is on a person to person level. Because I think a big part of why we're where we are as people is because as a culture, we've been indoctrinated to have these maladaptive ways of relating to one another, right? That culture is almost a standard in family systems. And then it makes people fall prey to negative work environments, political environments, family environments after they leave the home. So I don't think there's anything more important in our time of life now as we're living in modern society and we have modern medicine and modern technology. Like, we have so many incredible things that make life so much better for humanity than it was 100 years ago. Now we need to fix our family systems. We need to fix how we interpersonally relate. And that's going to be like that wall to break through, to just say, wow, now this is the utopia of modern life that this is the promised land. It's not spaceships that we're flying around and moving to Mars or anything. The promised land is really treating every individual with respect and autonomy. Like, that is the promised land. And that's where we need to get. And that's why we do the work that we do, because we believe so firmly in it.
Do you then think we are going backwards when it comes to our interpersonal relationships between each other?
I think what's happening now, I'd be interested to know your feelings on it too, especially because, female perspective, male perspective. What I am seeing is the pushback of people who aren't in the frame of mind that you and I are on with regards to relationships, with equality, and uh, people who aren't in that frame of mind are pushing back hard. But that often happens right before you break through the wall. And this is the moment where we could get really discouraged because they're pushing back really, really hard on people, and especially women's rights. Like, people are coming for our rights like they haven't for a really long time. And it can be exhausting and frightening, and people may just feel stuck in the mud, right? Like, oh my goodness, this is coming at us from every angle possible. But taking a different perspective, look back. Why are they fighting so hard? Because they feel they need to. They're pulling out all the stops because we actually have made a lot of progress. We really have. And they're fighting the fight. This is not the time for us to give up. We have to stand in our space, in our knowledge of who we are and of what we believe, and just stay strong and not allow ourselves to be pulled into that vortex of feeling the attack, right? We need to conserve our energy. It's a really interesting time here in the US. Women's rights are really being attacked, but this is the feeling that people are having now, that we need to take a step back and not be distracted by all the news, right? We can't get distracted by things like the changing of a body of water's name, right? We can't get distracted by that and give that our attention because something more important is happening over here. And so I think it's interesting at this point in time, and I'm sorry my thoughts aren't that eloquent on it. It's we're in what I call the messy middle. Like, we're in this moment where things are feeling like they're getting really bad, and it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. But take a step back and say, no, like, this is the darkest hour before the storm passes, and we have to get through it, and we have to support one another, and we can't allow ourselves to get knocked off of our path. So yes, it's really frightening and disheartening, but I think the pushback on women's rights, and when you look at a movie like Adolescence, right? When you look at the framework of what raising our children is like, and the experiences they're having on social media, and when they're trying to learn how to be people and how to be good members of society. When you see the point that we're in right now, but then a movie like Adolescence is being made and everyone's talking about it, that shows you that there is a push in the what I feel is the right direction of awareness. And once we're more aware and we accept that there's a problem, we can fix the problem. So I do think we're moving in the right direction, but we got to push through this battle and this wall that we're experiencing right now. Do you feel that too? Do you feel that we're kind of in this heightened state of fighting basically, patriarchy and misogyny right now?
I'll give you, well, let me answer your question first. I
Yeah.
think that you only receive pushback when you're at the door, right? Enemy at the gates.
Mm.
That's the only time you receive pushback, right? So when you're like 10 yards down the road, they don't necessarily, you might get an arrow, you might get a sniper, but there isn't that pushback. But once you're at the
Yeah.
gate, once you're at the door, then you know that you're right at the cusp of something. It could be
Yeah.
defeat, it could be victory, but there's going to be some form of change, right?
Yeah.
Now, from a male perspective, and this could be a Canadian one looking into the US system, since you referenced the US one,
Yeah.
the conversations I have here with other coaches is that we're at shock at some of the things that you guys argue about, right? Right? We are, right? Because we're thinking this couldn't be something in our generation. And I look around the same age,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
But one thing that we did notice, and I highlighted this, is that what is being discussed impacts, and I'm just speaking from a heterosexual perspective, does impact men and does impact women. The problem that I find, and I shared it to my colleagues, is that when it comes to the complaints, women are complaining over here, men are complaining over here, but no one is
Mm.
coming together. The people that
Mm.
are coming together, they get it from both sides. You're a pick me, right? We've all heard that,
Mm.
you're a pick me. You're just trying to do that so you can get more male attention. You're just doing that so you can
Mm.
get more favor with women. You're a simp. There's all these, what used to be someone that was a gentleman or a gentlewoman, someone that was reasonable. Now we either call them simps online, you're pandering towards women, or you're a pick me for women, you're pandering towards men. So now you're getting shamed for both sides versus just one. So the reason why I would then say that it's possibly going backwards is because I can understand our grandparents' generation, where it's very traditional, very role related, that okay, the man does this, he's probably in the factory somewhere working long hours, the woman's taking care of the home, she runs all that. I could understand their thinking. In 2025, we don't even think that way.
Mm.
Right? It's more so what you can do for me. I'm going to
Yeah.
extract as much resources, time, and energy. In the case of the woman, your youth, right? Because I've heard so many women who spend so much time searching for something in a relationship that they know is bad. And by the time they realize they want to come out of it, they can't have the child they want. They feel like they're
Mm.
too old to getting married. So I would say that it's going backwards only on those fronts because the breakdown between the two groups has suffered, whereas it's going forward because women's rights are more discussed within women, men's rights within men. But when's the last time, and I'll ask you, you've seen men and women come together to say that let's discuss human rights and let's better
Mm.
the world that way, because whatever it is that is impacting the world, let's remove that it's gender based, right?
Mm.
Violence predominantly happens more, violent acts happen to a lot of men, but women tend to have it from men, right? So let's say that violence overall is bad. Let's not say that violence towards women, violence towards men. Let's say that, you know what, we need to come together and say that we all suffer every time a woman gets beat up by her partner. The good men suffer too, because that woman's going to go out in the world and say that, what if all men are like this? Or if a
Mm.
man gets taken advantage of financially by a woman, he may go on and say all women are like this. So the good women and the good men get damaged as well. So that's where I would like to see everyone come together and fight the good
Mm.
fight and hopefully progress that way.
Mm.
I know that was a
Yeah.
long answer, but that's what
No,
I'd want.
I think it's interesting because I think from my perspective, the only person I can control is myself and my response to people. And to get back to something you said a bit ago about, basically people evoking shame, trying to shame you about how you feel or how you're showing up. I think once you have healed, you get to a point where you understand if someone is coming at you with shame, they're triggered. It's about them. It's not about you. And you can just like drop that, right? That's not yours. You keep that. That's not mine. You keep that and not shame them back. Like, it's not to say anything negative towards the person even. It's not even your business. Their shame of you isn't even your business. And when you start to heal and understand that they're showing up and their perception of you and their projections on you, it's about them. And then you can conserve your energy and not worry about that. But we have to understand when women are coming into relationships in the world, the majority of violence is statistically perpetrated by men, not by all men. There are wonderful men. I'm married to a man, and he's the kindest, gentlest person in the world in my eyes. Um, but he does get to listen to me talk about this a lot, and he doesn't take it personally because he understands it's not about him, and he understands that his role as a feminist which is just to say, as a person who believes that men and women, as you said, should have equal rights, like they're equal, right? This is a problem for everyone. It's not a men's problem, a woman's problem. It's a person problem. So being a feminist is just saying, yeah, women are equal to men. And so his job as a feminist is to speak up, is to be a good example, is to call out systems, and he works in and has worked in politics in Europe for a long time. And a big part of that was it's interesting because diversity is a big thing right now in the United States. You've probably heard in Canada, diversity programs are under scrutiny and fire right now. But it's interesting because I can recall, in Europe when they were trying to elect more women because all the political parties were just full of men. And that's great that men are there, but women also needed a seat there too. And the only way to have equality at the beginning was to be intentional about it, right? To say, no, when we have our running mate next year, we're going to choose a woman, right? Which people may say, well, oh, that's DEI and, you're not choosing the right person for the job, whatever. But there are plenty of very qualified women, right? And so you're saying, no, like this year, we are choosing a woman no matter what, and we're bringing her in. Okay. Then, as time goes on, women see themselves in these positions of politics, and you're no longer having to say, okay, let's make sure we have a woman on the team because women in the communities are seeing women in politics and they're saying, okay, I see a woman in politics, I can do that job. And they're self-selecting. But when you have a system that has been only men, right? When you have a system that has been only Caucasian people, when you have a system that has been, only one group of people, you do in order to allow that system to change over time. It's like we said, that hamster in the wheel, right? Like we need to stop. We need to make a different choice. We need to make it very visible. And then we can rely on things just kind of happening. So this is my response to your point about saying, I want this to be a humanity thing. I don't want to focus on men versus women. Yes. But I think to get there, we do have to make some really intentional choices and make some building blocks. We have to make sure women have a seat at the table, and we have to have men be very vocal about it. Like, no, like, for example, in the US, a lot of healthcare decisions are happening about women's healthcare rights right now, and they're being made literally by groups of only men. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we need to rebuild the system so that everyone has a seat at the table. Because when we're talking about rights of groups of people and those people are not at the table, we are missing out on the opportunity to make sure that we are actually serving that group of people, right? We need to have that group represented at the table. And that does require, I think, from the beginning saying, no, I'm going to intentionally make sure we're including the people who have been othered in this business, in this society, in this culture, so that we can set ourselves on a different path moving forward. And then people will self-select because they see themselves in those roles.
That part I absolutely agree. When it comes to being inclusive, is you want, I strongly believe that, to use your analogy, when it comes to the table, is that you want every possible voice at that table, right? It could be a man, it could be a woman, black, white, pink, purple, green, whatever, because we're all in it together. And I will also agree with, I think sometimes some voices get silenced more so than other voices, and that could be a number of reasons. And another point you made, where I like to use an analogy where when you have like a specific group of like demographic always in power, is that if you are better or if you're more qualified than most, why do you fear the few? Right.
Mm.
So for example, if I am a man and let's say a black man is the majority in a specific area, and a white woman comes in and she's qualified just like everyone else, why would I be opposed to that if I'm just as qualified as she is?
Mm.
Right? From a psychological perspective. Now, if I was someone that didn't earn that role, right?
Mm.
And you come in and I know that you have all the credentials, of course I'm going to feel a certain type of way because I know that you're more qualified than me and better than me, right? So that's where I think some of the fear from the men
Mm.
in power comes from, is because they know eventually they're going to lose power. And you've probably seen it, right? Someone who's had all the power, what's one of the worst things you can do to them? Take away some of their power,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Because What are they going to do? If the landscape would have changed completely and you had 10 people on a board that controlled the entire world, and it wasn't eight of a specific group, it wasn't eight men, it was, let's say, two men, two women, two non binary, like it was as diverse as possible.
Mm.
Those two people who have thoughts of, oh my God, you know what, I want to control everything. Now they're outnumbered because the majority doesn't think like them. Even though the majority doesn't look the same, it's so diverse, right? So I think sometimes that's where the issue really is that some people, to your earlier point, they want power over people. Once they get it, the abuser, I abuse you, I abuse you, I abuse you. As soon as you break free, that's where they feel, oh my God, I need another victim. I need another person. So when I say it's a human right, that's why I want like the men like your husband to speak up for the
Yeah.
women, because sometimes women either they could be, maybe they don't know what to say. A lot of women still think it's not their place to speak up. So someone has to do it, because if you go all the way back throughout history, people who were enslaved, someone had to speak up, right? And then eventually people from other groups had to speak up as well. So I agree 100% with your inclusion point.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't put the fire out from inside the house. Like you need the people in the house, they need to do everything they can to get out, but they also need people outside the house, like up. And to go back to your point about let's just look at these problems as people problems. Yes. Like once we really get above the trees, if my neighbor has a problem, it is my problem, right? If my fellow human who's a different race than me or a different gender than me or relates, considers themselves to have a different sexual identity than what the current administration says is possible, that's my problem because I'm a human, they're a human, and these problems they just switch, right? It may not be your problem today, but it will be your problem tomorrow. And so we need to treat one another as brother and sister and really truly help one another even when it's not our issue because it will be tomorrow, right? Like literally to get back to what we started the conversation with, when I came into my neighborhood after this 100-year ice storm, you know, the first hunk of trees I came to that was, 15 feet tall, it wasn't my problem. It wasn't in front of my house, but we cleared it. And then we came to the next person's and we cleared it. And we came to the next person's and we cleared it. And guess whose house was the last in the line? Mine, because mine's the deepest in the neighborhood, but everyone was more than happy to help me. And that's the thing. Like, you can't ignore other people's problems and suffering. It doesn't work. We have to support one another because that's the only way that modern life works. We don't want to go back to the days where we're just living in our separate caves and just trying to survive and make sure that we have everything we need. Because if we don't, well, tough luck. We don't want to do that. Right here, we have in Petoskey, Michigan, right now, we have trucks, we have linemen coming in to fix our electrical lines from multiple states. I saw one today. They're just up on the hill. They're from southern Indiana, and I'm in northern Michigan. So they're from very, very, very far away. And they drove up here because that's the benefit and the gifts of community and of society when we come together. Because a community doesn't have 500 linemen and trucks, right? These tragedies, we only pull through them when we don't look at them on the TV and say, oh man, that looks really tough. I'm glad that's a town over and not my house. Community only helps when we say, not look at our neighbor and say, I say this to my kids all the time. When they're feeling feelings of jealousy, one of the things that we always make sure to say is, we never look in our neighbor's bowl to count how much they have. We look in our neighbor's bowl to make sure that they have enough. And if they don't, we help them and make sure they have enough. And that's what community is. And that's what being a kind person is. And so for me, that's just what life is all about. And that's what this experience has been a reminder of. The only way this works and modern society is giving us the gifts that it truly can is when we view life that way and we view problems as a community issue and we help one another.
to highlight that then, as well as the ice storm analogy, because I think that's going to be like the theme of what we're talking about today,
Yeah,
right?
because I'm cold. I don't have heat, guys. I'm
I know.
cold.
Do you think we've become so individualized that we've forgotten the impact and importance of community?
I don't feel that we have forgotten, but I feel that we have been, for many moments, distracted. And it's kind of like someone looking on their phone when their kid is playing right next to them and their kid is like being so adorable and they're maybe doing something for the first time, right? And they could be reading to their child, but instead they're reading on their cell phone and they're getting sucked in. And that's not even to bring an element of shame. It's just, it's addictive. We're getting dopamine and things, right? We're getting distracted. So I think we've all been very distracted from what's really going on around us because of social media and these world scale problems that we can't fix. But when the chips are down, when difficult things happen and we recover our own agency of what we can do in these situations, it's an excellent reminder to be present in our own lives. And that translates to putting the phone down and just turning and looking at your child who's playing next to you and saying, "Oh, you want to play?" And then you get to hear them giggle and you get to hear, the fun things that they're saying and have these experiences with them that are going to be so much more joyful and impactful than anything you could have read on your phone, on social media, or what have you, whatever it was that you're distracted by. So, yes, there are so many distractions in the world, but if we pull back from that and change our focus back to the experiences that are happening around us and our relationships and opportunities to build community, the communities are there and they're waiting and they're hungry for you. And I can tell you, when I came into my neighborhood and I looked at this walls of trees, and I think I sent you a picture before meeting you because I wanted you to actually see it. This wall of trees coming into my neighborhood, the feeling that we all had when that was gone and people could drive through was incredible. And I think that's why I say communities aren't gone, right? We haven't forgotten it completely, but we're distracted. But once you do something simple like decide to volunteer at a local animal shelter, if that's something that you're interested in, or at a food kitchen, whatever it is that would really spark something in you. Once you do that, once you help your neighbor with something small, once you just maybe pay a little more attention to what's going on with your kids, once you really connect with the people in your life, all of a sudden you remember what you've been missing, and those distractions are much less enticing than they were. But it's all about habits. It's all about really practicing and changing. It can be hard to let go of some of these distractions that have become such a big part of our lives. But when we do it and we have those core experiences that remind us of what really lights our fire, which is community and healthy relationships, then I think that will help bring us back together and help us face the challenges that we have. Because I think if anybody turns on the news, we know we as a world, we have a lot of things to face right now, and really diving into community will help us get through it for sure.
I 100% agree. Like I can reference, you had the ice storm, I can reference the snowstorm, and I shared with you like when our neighbors
Mm.
came together and we cleared it, we celebrated,
Yeah.
right? We're tired, we're exhausted. They're much older than I am, right? But we came together and we celebrated. And I remember afterwards speaking to one of them, and I told them I have the best neighbors in the world, is because when one of them's away, I'll clear their driveway of their snow. When I'm away visiting Michigan or wherever, they'll clear mine. We all come together and do it. We don't do it because we're asked. We do it because we have a protection and love and support for each other, because that's how I grew, because I was raised by my grandmother. That's how she told me community was. When you needed milk and you
Mm.
didn't have milk, you knew you can go to your next door neighbor for a bag of milk and they would give you a bag of milk, right? Or
Yeah.
if you needed butter, if you needed bread, because if they were in that situation, they can come to you and do that. And when you mentioned the distractions, it reminded me of this couple where when they would go to bed, one of them had their phone and they'd be on their phone, right? While the other person's trying to sleep, and the person couldn't sleep because cell phones in the dark, they're so bright.
Yeah.
right? And I remember the person made the joke saying that, "Oh, I'm in a relation. I think I have two husbands." Like two husbands. I was like, are you polygamous? Like, no, my husband's always on his phone, so it's him and the phone, right? Because the
Hmm.
phone's in the bed with them. And you laugh, but then you step back and you think about it, you're like, wow, here you are, you know, in a state of you want to get comfortable and sleeping, you're so vulnerable, and but you love this
Hmm.
person, right? And they're on their phone. And to your points, I think sometimes we don't realize how big of a distraction things are until maybe someone points it out, or you highlight to them saying that, hey, we went to bed at 11 p.m. You're on your phone until 3 a.m. doing who knows what,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And from a physician's standpoint, our sleep, we should protect our sleep more than we protect anything else if we want to start making those choices that make us healthier and happier and just make tomorrow better and then the next day and the next day better. Having healthy sleep is a big part of that. And so when we talk about, smartphones in bed, it's a really big problem. And then when we wake up, it's the first thing we look at. So then we're also looking at that. We're not getting the sunlight first thing in the day, and we're also getting these negative inputs. It's its own, that could be its own podcast discussion about how damaging that is just for our health and our body. But it is like having another person in the room when you're trying to connect with someone and you're vying for their time. And the reality is you could most likely never give as big of a dopamine hit in that single moment in casual conversation as the phone could. So the phone's going to win. The person's going to preference that phone. And I heard someone say recently that, if you can't leave the room without your phone being on your person, if leaving your phone in a different room makes you feel a bit panicked, sets off your nervous system, if it triggers you, that's a sign that you may need to make some changes in your relationship to your phone. And I think when we're talking about interpersonal relating, that has been a huge distraction and a huge barrier to forming those really meaningful connections. And as you said, experiencing those vulnerable moments together. Because just like when we talk about your moment with the snow removal, mine with the ice storm, why was that so impactful? Why did it strengthen our relationships? Because those were really vulnerable moments. And instead of taking advantage of one another, we helped one another. And when someone helps us in our vulnerable moments and meets us there, that means so much to us, and that leaves a lasting impact. So when you come home from a bad day at work and you want to connect with your partner and they're preferencing this device because it gives them dopamine, right? Like you understand why they're doing it, but if you're feeling not well and you're wanting to connect with them and have those vulnerable moments and you just have to swallow it down because you can't connect with them, then that's such a missed opportunity, and it's going to lead to a relationship that's not really authentic and it's not really connected. So yeah, it's such a important thing to be mindful of. And we talk about the different habits that we can work on changing to improve our health and happiness in our relationships. Monitoring our use of a device is one thing that we can commit to doing and set it as a goal maybe for the next month, right? I'm going to be mindful of what I'm doing. And then once I check the temperature, okay, what are the changes I'm going to initiate? What's the accountability that I'm going to have with myself? And then what's the goal in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, so that I can have better relationships and just a better use of my time and not feel so attached to this non-living thing.
So, Schaefer, as we close, and since you mentioned it, I'm going to give you three wishes. These are things that you wish people could know. So, what are three things that you wish people could know when it comes to interpersonal relationships, and why?
Hmm. Number one, I think the most important thing to know is that you matter. And every time you're feeling that feeling in your gut that something isn't right, just saying, I matter, and staying true to what that means, what that translates to in your decisions and your response to whatever it is that's triggering that feeling in you, that's a great starting off point. And knowing that you are never allowed to forget that, because no relationship that's meant for you, no job that's meant for you, etc., requires of you to abandon yourself and make you feel at risk and make you feel like you don't matter. So, understanding that I matter and holding on to that and never forsaking that, I think is the first pivotal thing you can do if you're just feeling that your life is out of alignment and you're feeling like that frog in the boiling water and you're trying to make different decisions, just holding tight to that. A statement that I share with clients and we talk about on the show a lot is, if you can't grow where you are, you have to go where you can grow. That's the next step to I matter. Because when you acknowledge that you matter, you have to make choices. And often that may mean that you have to choose a different relationship, a different job, a different place to live. Whatever it is, you may have to make choices to go where you can grow. Because if we're not growing, we're dying. We need to do that. And one other thing that I always love to talk with people about, I call it the butt wheel, BUT, the butt wheel. So when we are on this journey of trying to change the trajectory of our thoughts, so we've acknowledged we matter, we've acknowledged that the source material we're working with isn't going to get us where we want to go. So what do we do now? The next step is often, well, let's say I want to be in a healthy relationship, but I don't know what one looks like, right? So we've acknowledged our relationship is unhealthy. We've acknowledged it doesn't work, but we're saying I want to be in a healthy relationship, but I don't know what one looks like. And I call this tool that I use in coaching the butt wheel, because we're often stuck in our limiting beliefs in the way that we frame our thoughts in our mind. What we can do with the butt wheel is we don't have to change what we're saying. We just have to change the momentum and the trajectory of our thoughts. We can start with the source material we have and use it differently. So we can say, I've never seen a healthy relationship, but I want to be in a healthy relationship. So we can take the same thoughts that we have, because it's a lot easier to start with what you have than to set some lofty goal and use tools that you don't know how to use and that you don't even possess. But instead, saying, I'm going to change the trajectory of my thoughts. And instead of saying, I want a healthy relationship, but I don't know what one looks like, I'm going to say, I don't know what one looks like, but I want a healthy relationship. So then that sets you on the trajectory that you're going to seek out the tools that will get you where you want to be. You will listen to podcasts, you will read books, you will have conversations with people who have healthy relationships, and you will invest in your life and yourself, knowing that you matter. And that if you want something different, you need to make different choices. And you will start the important, difficult, but necessary work that will take you to where you want to be.